Once again, mate, you're a man in demand and you're always busy, so I appreciate your time.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure, mate.
Just before we talk about Indigenous issues, and Stan, a number of years ago, everyone was talking about closing the gap, you know. Is it closing?
No, it's not. You know, these closing the gap measurements have been around now for over a decade, and by every measurement, we're not getting anywhere. You know, Indigenous people still die 10 years younger on average than the rest of the population. You know, this is the one that's just astounding. We're not even 3% of the population, and we're about 30% of people in prison. You know, for juvenile detention, it's over 50%. In the Northern Territory, I think it's around 97% of all kids in juvenile detention are Indigenous kids. You know, this is just, if you look at Australia and you look at what an incredibly rich and, you know, prosperous, incredible country Australia is, that this is allowed to happen. We've just seen with the coronavirus crisis what we can do in an emergency when you throw everything at fixing something. And this has been allowed to continue year after year after year. You know, it's inexcusable.
Well, the government's not doing enough. Aware of that. Again, not a loaded question. What about Rugby League? Are we doing enough?
Well, you know, I think I've always had this idea that we can't allow politics to solve all our problems. If the government's involved in your life, there's usually a problem, right? They usually want something from you, or there's something failing in your life the government has to fix. So, for me, politics moves when society moves. You know, it's culture and society that changes our world. It changes politics. And where do we come together? We come together around sport. And Rugby League has such an amazing heritage of Indigenous players. You know, growing up in the bush as I did, my dad and my uncle ran the team from the mission that we came from, the Three Ways Reserve in Griffith, all black team playing against white teams. You know, you'd meet each other on the sideline. You know, you'd fight on the field or whatever, and you'd come off and shake hands, and you built this sense of community. And I think it's through sport and that interaction. A little thing like Jonathan Thurston handing out his headgear at the end of every game. So that some kid goes home and he's got this headgear with an Indigenous design on it, and that changes something. You know, that's a personal connection. So through sport, whether it's rugby league, whatever it is, we're able to bring people together and you change a community. And that leads to change at a political level. That's what we have to do.
Mate, congratulations on the Adam Goodes doco, The Australian Dream. We were talking before, one at the moment, 20 international awards, raised a lot of awareness. Stan, was in making the documentary, was there anything in the documentary, even given all the stuff you've seen, that shocked you?
I think there was a moment that shocked me, and it shouldn't shock me because we know this happens all the time, and sadly we are far too used to it. And there's Ben Simmons there, who was one of the helped fund the film with LeBron James, and he have a shared production company, and they are involved in the film. But Nova Peris, and I won't use the word, but here's Nova, who's been a senator, the first Indigenous person to win a gold medal at the Olympics, hockey gold medalist, then switches to athletics and wins a Commonwealth Games gold medal. I mean, a phenomenal athlete. And she was telling a story during the documentary about sitting there in their green and gold at an Australian team dinner, and one of her teammates says, "Pass the salt, N." I mean, seriously. You are representing your country, and one of your teammates wearing green and gold thinks that they can say that to you. The casual nature of that, the entitlement of that, the idea that someone can be seen that way, that you can say something to someone in that way that demeans them on the basis of their colour of their skin, their race. It shouldn't shock us because we know it's far too common, but it did, and it hurts. And it hurts, you know, if you can bring down our heroes like that, then imagine what it does to some young Indigenous kid that sees that sort of thing every day in their lives.
Yeah, incredible. Stan, your career, been amazing, and you spent a lot of your working life and a lot of time living over in these places that are really dangerous, but right at the forefront of, you know, world news and issues. Before we move on to the Middle East, mate, you spent a long time in Beijing. In China as a journalist, how did the Communist Party treat you? Oh,
you know, we're an enemy of the state. You know, if you're reporting in China as I was for CNN, and I spent about a decade in Hong Kong and then in Beijing, our job is to tell the stories. This is an example here. Our job is to tell the stories that they don't want us to tell. And whenever we did stories, they were pelting us with rocks there. here they are trying to arrest me again, lead me away. They would try to stop us at every turn. The screen would go black whenever our stories came on from CNN that they didn't want Chinese people to see. We were arrested on several occasions, taken to police cells. You'd get roughed up. They would take all of your footage, run off the road by them, beaten up on several occasions, particularly by plainclothes secret police. But they monitored my home. My home was bugged. My family was under constant surveillance. They wanted to let you know at any point that they could get to you. And I remember one of the first things that happened after we'd moved from Hong Kong to Beijing. It was the middle of winter, and the lake in the centre of Beijing freezes over. So we took the kids down to go ice skating on the lake. And Tracy, my wife, and I were over here, and the boys were over here on one of those sleds. The two young boys in the front, and the older boy was pushing them. And I looked up, and these two burly guys, all in blacks, plain clothes, cops, came along, and they shoved my oldest son out of the way across the ice, took off at great speed with my two younger boys. I chased after them, and they hurled them across the ice, jumped off the lake, across the fence, into the car and took off. It was just a warning to say, we know who you are, we're watching you, we can get to your kids whenever we want. You know, and that was it was a constant battle to tell those stories in a place where news is so heavily controlled.
Some of the places you've been at the forefront, the border town where Bin Laden was assassinated.
Yeah, Abbottabad.
His house, the next day you were there.
Yeah, we were at his house. So I'd been in Afghanistan, and then the word came through that Bin Laden had been killed. So we flew straight down from Kabul to Islamabad and got in the car and drove out to Abbottabad. It's amazing to think, you know, you're in the middle of this neighbourhood, and there was this quite a large house, a large compound. Incredible to think that the most wanted man in the world, the man who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks, was in this town. Now, Abbottabad is a military town. It's, you know, like Duntroon or the Royal Military Academy in Canberra. It's where they train their military officers. So right in the middle of this military town was the most wanted man in the world. And I remember something that really stayed with me. We'd been filming there and talking to people and trying to get a sense of what life was like for him. And I went across to this little roadside stall to get a drink. And, you know, you'd think at this point they've captured Bin Laden, that a lot of people might be happy about, that he'd killed a lot of Muslims as well and orchestrated a lot of attacks against Pakistanis. And I ordered the drink, and this guy's standing there, and he looks at me and just spat in my face. Because what we represented as Americans, as CNN, he despised. So even at that point, there wasn't a sense that, oh, this is great, you've captured him. They may have been glad in a sense that he was captured, but we were still the enemy.
Dan, before taking the job at CNN, did they warn you this is all going to happen?
No, you know,
some sort of training.
Yeah, you do. You know, we would go through training to deal with hostile environments. So you'd learn how to negotiate a hostage situation if you ever found yourself in that situation. You'd learn how to treat a wound in case you ever got wounded. They'd teach you about security. I mean, we can't, as journalists, carry weapons, but we could have.
There's a sneaky one somewhere, wasn't there?
I'd never take that risk. But we did have people with us who were usually British Special Forces or former British Special Forces who were trained, and they would look after us and they'd go with us. You know, the first thing you do if you got into the car in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever we may be, you never forget the sound. I remember getting off the airport in Iraq. It came through. Get into the car, and the car is like a tank, you know, it's just this heavily fortified sort of vehicle, bulletproof windows, and the first thing you hear is, you know, just lock and load, and these guys are next to you, and you've got your flak jack on, and you think, we have to now get from here to here, and the chances of being, you know, caught up in a roadside bomb, being hijacked, being shot at, you live with that every single day. So you do go through training, but nothing can prepare you for living with that.
So, Stan, how did you leave your family behind to go and do these things? How hard was that for you?
Well, you know, it's really a job, Hindy, because I suppose a similar thing to football. It's what you train for. This is what I trained to do.
But we know going to training and going to games, we're going to come back. You know, that's because I'm sure you would have been in a situation where you've gone, holy dooly, this is the end for me. Yeah,
there were several occasions when that could have happened. But you go into game mode, or I would go into journalist mode. I was there to do a story. I had to gather information. I had to, my cameraman had to get pictures. I had to write the story. I had to interview people. Even in the middle of a suicide bombing, and I've been to many of those, where the blood is so thick on the ground that you can taste it in the back of your throat. I'd go to sleep at night and I could taste the smell. I tasted it. It was that pungent, the smell of it. You'd see bits of flesh. I remember seeing ladies, mothers picking bits of charred flesh out of the shrapnel holes in the walls and putting it into plastic bags because that's all they had left to bury of their children. But in the midst of this, I'm telling a story. So even though, yes, these are really bizarre circumstances to find yourself in, I've got to do a job. And just like you are with your teammates, you form such a close bond and you rely on these people. And I would go to the same places with basically the same people, and I would trust them with my life and they would trust me. But it's not to say it doesn't take a toll. I was like the frog in the slow boiling water, You don't realise how hot it's getting because it's boiling around you. Until in the end, and I had this, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. You have a complete breakdown. I went through a period of 6 months where I probably slept for about an hour a night. Because my mind was racing, I was hyper-vigilant, I couldn't transition from those circumstances where your life potentially is on the line every day to come back home where you've got to buy milk for the fridge, or, you pick up the kids from school. That transition is just so difficult. So it does take a real toll, but just like playing football or anything you're trained to do, when you're there, you go into that mode, you're doing a job.
We just had a question come through from a viewer, and to finish on a football note, Stan. He wants to know why so many champion Indigenous players come out of the New South Wales North Coast.
New South Wales North Coast and also Central West, like Wiradjuri people, like now there's Josh Adokar, Katoni Staggs, Blake Ferguson, Brent Naden, Jack Whiten, all Wiradjuri boys. You look up in the Central Coast and you've got Cody Walker, the North Coast, you've got Cody Walker, Greg Inglis, of course, from there, Latrell. I think there's a great sort of Nathan Blacklock with Tinga, Presto was from up there as well. It's just, you're growing up with that all the time, Matty. You're playing it in the backyard. Your uncle's played it, your father's played it. And there's great physicality. One thing about a lot of the northern region Aboriginal players like GI or Latrell, they're big, physically really strong and athletic.
Appreciate your honesty, Stan.
Stan, I've one more question. What's more dangerous, being in Pakistan or being an after party at the Logies?
Luckily, I didn't make it to the. But I do have a Logie story. The year I won a Logie, I go up on stage to collect it, and Mike Willesee, who was a real hero of mine, amazing journalist. Mike's there. Mike might have been a little bit sort of under the weather, but as he handed me the Logie, it slipped from his hand onto my hand, onto the podium and split in half.
Oh. Have you got that?
So they fixed it for me. So I've got the real one, but I never. No, the after parties are too dangerous for me.
Matty doesn't have a Logie.
I'm a very sedate
Matty
man.
wishes he had a Logie.
I'm a very.
Out of that whole break, the most amazing thing is someone was drunk at the Logies. I can't. Oh, Stan, no, appreciate your honesty, mate. That was enthralling. Yeah.